The New York Rangers have been officially eliminated from playoff contention, and they've got no way to blame but themselves.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1288 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So whatever microscopic miracle of a chance remained for the Rangers to get into the postseason, that is now over, thanks to the Rangers losing an afternoon game on the road against the Carolina Hurricanes by a final score of 7-3. Just another awful performance in a season completely chock full of them. This season was an absolute disaster. I think that anybody that watched this team for 80 games would certainly agree with me at this point. Just a spectacular failure on every level for everybody involved with this team, whether we're talking about Chris Drury in the front office, whether we're talking about Peter Laviolette and the coaching staff, or whether we're talking about these players. It was just a sad, sorry, pathetic excuse for a season. And this is your follow-up to being 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final and also having the best record in the league, the President's Trophy. Just the 4th time in NHL history that the reigning President's Trophy team has failed to make the playoffs the year after. And yes, the Rangers did it one time in the past, back in the early 90s. And, you know, just like everybody last year deserved credit for what this team accomplished and how many wins they had and the fighting spirit that they had, the way they were together and unified and just ready to go out there and battle every single night. Everybody deserved credit for that. The front office, everybody I just mentioned, Drury in the front office, Laviolette and the coaching staff, and all the players. They all deserve credit for what they did last year. Just as sure as that's true, they all deserve blame for whatever in the world we've been forced to watch this season as New York Ranger fans. This is one of the low points in the history of this franchise. It is one of the worst seasons in the history of the New York Rangers, and I don't say any of that lightly, but when you consider, again, where the expectations were and where I think a lot of us were at least hopeful this team would eventually get to this season, at least make another run at it, and you look at what's gone on, it's a miracle they were alive for the playoffs as long as they were, and the only reason that was the case, really, is the Eastern Conference seems to be down a little bit this season, and making the playoffs, even in a league where half the teams make the playoffs, it feels like, at least in the Eastern Conference, it was easier than ever this year to at least get into the dance, and the Rangers failed to even do that. They failed to even stay alive until, you know, the third to last game of the season. That was the end of the road for the New York Rangers. But, you know, we're going to go through this real quick here. Bottom line, everything we talk about in the first segment of today's show, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Everything that I'm about to talk about, it begs for closer analysis, a deeper dive, and we will certainly get to that once the offseason begins. We actually do still have 2 games left here, so we'll see how that goes. But we're going to go through kind of the cliff notes here, and like I said, there will be more to come during the offseason. We're also going to talk about the Ranger defensemen. I thought they were terrible in this game. I mean, stop me if you've heard that before. And Igor was hung out to dry. Igor didn't have a good game either. You know, I think it's certainly fair to criticize his performance in this game. And then we're going to close out the rest of today's episode by talking a little bit about Chris Kreider and how he was used very sparingly and why this is looking like basically just kind of a sad ending for Chris Kreider and his tenure with the New York Rangers. But again, to go through, you know, point by point here, party by party, I guess you could say. We could start with Chris Drury. Drury, man, he just completely lost the plot this year. He fumbled the entire offseason and never really seemed to recover. He made a bunch of in-season trades, in-season contract extensions, very few of which seem to have worked out in any meaningful way, and some of which now you look at and it's like, oh my God, that might be a disaster. Some of you might already be claiming that certain moves he made, certain contract extensions are complete disasters. I wouldn't go that far yet, because in the case of, like, you know, Igor being extended, Lafreniere being extended, it's still very early in the game. We got a ways to go there. But man, this has not been a banner year or 18 months for Chris Drury. And it all began in the offseason with his handling of Barclay Goodrow and Jacob Trouba. I still don't understand why before the season and then during the season, multiple times, and maybe this wasn't completely on Drury, but why are you leaking it to the press that you're looking to trade Jacob Trouba and you're going to waive Jacob Trouba and all this different stuff? Like what was the point of that? Because all you're doing is upsetting the apple cart, and you're also losing leverage. If you make it known, as he did when he sent out that memo in season, that you're looking to trade guys like Jacob Trouba, guys like Chris Kreider, you're losing leverage and you're making it obvious to teams that you're looking for a shakeup. And obviously, they did end up eventually trading Jacob Trouba. But if you were going to do that, the time for it was the offseason. My understanding was that Jacob Trouba had until I think like it was like a day and a half before NHL free agency began. Trouba had that long to submit his, partial no trade clause, the 15 team list, right? And he waited until the 0 hour to do that, which is his right. But then Drury doesn't trade him and he lets it drag into the season. Trouba admitted that like he didn't know how to lead the team after that happened and everything fell apart. The thing to do would have been to just operate in the shadows, wait until Trouba gives you his list, and then move on from him as painlessly as you possibly can. And then you could put that newly created cap space into bring in some free agents that obviously want to come here. So he completely misplayed that, completely bungled that. Obviously didn't handle it in a very human way with Trouba or with Barclay Goodrow. He got rid of Goodrow via, waivers and did what he had to do. And then some of the moves in season, I didn't have a problem with the with the Lafreniere extension. I thought the price was about right, and I thought Lafreniere had shown enough in the last season and the start of this season as well, where it's like, okay, this is going to be money well spent, and then his production just fell off a cliff. So that doesn't look so good. The Igor extension, I wanted the Rangers to keep Igor, but there is no reason on God's green earth why Igor Shesterkin should be making this much more money per season than all the other elite goaltenders. And I'm hoping that doesn't handcuff the Rangers too much, but you've got a goalie now making $11.5 million per season with a full no move clause for 8 straight years. So you better keep your fingers crossed that Igor can have a better season next year than he did this year. And yes, Igor was hung out to dry more times than we can possibly count this year, but be that as it may, that extension doesn't look so good. Then you've got some other trades. I mean, the Carson Soucy trade is not looking all that good. The Kakko trade, I mean, it could go either way. I think Borgen, he had a rough game yesterday, but I think overall he's mostly played well. And it just became obvious that this wasn't going to work out with Kakko. Kakko got off to a just white hot start with the Kraken. He's cooled off a little bit in terms of offensive production, but that's another one where Drury better keep his fingers crossed that, that trade for Borgen and subsequent extension for Borgen works out in the Rangers' favor. That's a move that certainly you can question as well. I don't know, man. Just wasn't a good year for Chris Drury. He did what he had to do in terms of trading the Ranger in-house impending UFAs at the deadline. I think that certainly made sense, moving on from guys like Smith and Lindgren or VZ. But there's another one right there, while we're talking about it. Bring in Riley Smith. What was the Rangers' obsession with this guy? I will never understand that, and I understand it even less now that, I actually saw him play, a half season with the New York Rangers. So Drury wasn't any good this year. I think, like I said, the last year and a half is by far the worst time period of Chris Drury's New York Ranger GM tenure. And I don't know what you do next. It's going to be a very interesting offseason. I don't know what the next move is going to be for Chris Drury, but certainly I'm going to be watching, that's for sure. And so will all of you. Peter Laviolette, it feels like he tried some things early in the season to break this team out of its slump. He shuffled the line combinations a little bit. He had different players playing positions that they don't usually play. Kakko was at center. Mika was on the wing. He tried some different things for sure, but then it felt like we got to a certain point where he kind of just gave up. And I don't know if that's because the players around him had quit. Wouldn't be the first time that this core group of Ranger players has quit on a coach. Probably won't be the last time either. I mean, it might not be the last time. So maybe at a certain point, he just kind of threw up his hands and said, you know what, I can't reach these guys. But if that's what happens, it's still inexcusable. You're still the coach. You still have to find a way to push the buttons, to put these guys in a position to succeed, to find a way to motivate them. That's basically coaching 101, right? It's getting your guys ready to go and making sure they're locked in and they're focused. And if nothing else, they're at least giving you an honest effort. And we didn't see the Rangers doing that for the vast majority of this season. Now, I know a lot of people were talking about maybe Laviolette should have been fired during the season. You can certainly make that case. But my thing was kind of like, I didn't want to allow this core group of Ranger players to get away with that, quitting on another coach a year after he takes you to the Eastern Conference Final. It's basically a repeat of what we saw with Gerard Gallant. The only difference is that with year 2 of Gallant, at least the Rangers eventually got things together and turned things around. Obviously, the playoffs were a disaster against the Devils that year, but they at least picked things up a little bit. That never happened this year. Not really. They had that 7-0-3 stretch in 2025. Even when that was happening, though, did anybody really think the Rangers were going to go on this epic run? I tried to be as hopeful and optimistic as I possibly could, but I don't know. It just never felt like all that authentic, even when the Rangers were winning games at that time. And then the stubbornness by Laviolette down the stretch was just ridiculous. I mean, the same 5 guys on the miserable power play that they had, and now scratching guys like Perot and Othman. And, Berard's been in and out of the lineup. Berard got sent down to the AHL. That never should have happened either. Forcing Yuso Parson into the lineup. I mean, what are we doing here at a certain point, And the time on the ice never really seems to make any sense either in terms of guys that are going out there and producing and giving you an honest effort and guys that are not. He continues to defer to these veterans that have largely basically run this team into the ground. And then you've got the players who I, in a way, kind of already just started talking about just a second ago there. But, nobody wants to do their job. Nobody wants to put in an honest effort. Nobody really seems all that focused. It doesn't feel like this is a group that took a lot of pride in being a New York Ranger. And again, I don't know what this offseason is going to hold. I don't know who's going to be back and who's going to be on their way. But you need to find players that are willing to put on their hard hat. And you need players that are, excited to be a New York Ranger, that it means something to them. There's an original 6 team. There's a lot of history. Not all of it is good. We know about the one Stanley Cup in 85 years or whatever it is at this point. But there's still something to be said for, playing with a team that has as much history as the New York Rangers. We didn't see anybody even pretend to step up as a leader once Jacob Trouba was traded away to the Ducks. None of the alternate captains. And we're still at a point here, and I think this says everything, where we have no idea who the next Ranger captain should be. I mean, do you? Now, there might be people listening to this that have a preference or, I'd like to see them go with JT Miller. I'd like to see them go with Vincent Trocheck. Whatever it might be, maybe you have like an outside-the-box idea too. But like, who's really like the guy that you would slap that C on going into next year? For a while, we thought it would be Trocheck, and he's been bad down the stretch and, just kind of seems off a little bit, just like the whole rest of the team does. JT Miller, maybe, but you're rolling the dice with JT Miller because he is a volatile personality. I think the risk was worth it. The Rangers need some energy and somebody that kind of keeps you on your toes in the locker room for sure. But making him the captain, you're rolling the dice with a move like that. And beyond that, I don't even know who it would be. This says everything too. The 4 alternate captains right now, I don't think there's a single Ranger fan out there that wants to see any of those 4 guys as the captain next season. Kreider, Mika, Fox, Panarin. Do you want one of those guys to be the captain? Let me know if I'm wrong. Maybe there's people that are going to be in the comment section and say, yeah, make Mika Zibanejad the captain or make Adam Fox the captain. But I'm a little bit skeptical about that. So I don't know, man. It was a mess. It was a disaster. And like I said, everything I just mentioned here, the tip of the iceberg, we're going to a lot greater detail about all of this in the days and weeks ahead. And fair warning, some of you aren't going to like what I have to say. It's just that simple. Just as sure as I praised this team and gave this team all the credit in the world for battling last season, I have to be honest and get real about what this was this season. This was a terrible season by any possible measure, by any possible metric, just an absolute disaster. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to this game and specifically the performance from the Ranger defenseman in this game. Also going to talk a little bit about Chris Kreider at the end of today's episode. We'll do all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a long-term project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. You've got fast and easy hiring. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, with multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Cost-effective growth. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers as always, and we've got a lot to do. Like I said, in the days and weeks ahead here, it's going to be a long off season, a longer off season than we've been used to the last handful of seasons here, but it is what it is. In our next episode, this is going to be coming for you guys on Monday. I'm going to talk about what we would like to see from the Rangers in these final 2 games. One of the first things that comes to mind, and certainly we'll talk about this, is a prominent role for the kids, whether that's Perot, whether that's Offman, whether that's Berard, or Matthew Robertson, who got called up from the AHL a little bit earlier today and will be making his AHL debut on Monday. Want to see these guys get some significant ice time. I mean, honestly, at this point, I would just settle for them being in the lineup. That's kind of where we've gotten here and how ridiculous it's gotten. Just give me these guys in the lineup and I won't complain about their ice time. If I could talk to Peter Laviolette and ask him one thing, that would be it. Just put them in the lineup. I won't say anything about their ice time. Just at least give me these guys on the ice in 2 meaningless games at the end of the season here. But talking about this game specifically, I mean, it's just a very fitting end because the Rangers were bad all season. They routinely got just absolutely smacked by the good teams in this league. Like, how many times this season did the Rangers beat a good team, like a really good team, a team that's like, say, like a top 8 team in the league or a top 10 team in the league? How often did they beat them? How often were they even competitive with them? Certainly not in this game yesterday. I know they had a little bit of a flurry in the third period, did the Rangers, but who cares? They weren't going to win that game. They were down by 4 goals. They haven't even come back from 2 goals down the entire season to win a game, so it wasn't going to start in this one. But there was a sequence in the second period that really kind of summed everything up for the Rangers. Down 3-0, trying to at least get back into the game a little bit. And you've got Lafreniere with a really nice toe drag in the offensive zone, passes to the right side to Panarin, wide open net. Panarin fires it off the post. The guy with this deadly accurate shot misses the open net. So then it goes the other way. Canes make a couple of quick passes, and Jankowski's wide open in front of the net, and he scores. And you watch this sequence, and it just makes you realize something, or kind of, I mean, I think a lot of us already realize this by now. All the Ranger opponents do everything faster than the Rangers. Everybody's just a little bit quicker. I'm not talking about like straight line speed or anything like that. That's one thing. The Rangers aren't great there either. But I'm talking about just reflexes, just making things happen quickly, playing with a sense of urgency and anticipation out there. The Rangers don't do it. Nearly all their opponents do it better than they do. And we saw on this play. Fox and Susie are both behind the goal line, during this play. And Jankowski's wide open in front of the net, and he scores, and it's 4-0. And at that point, yeah, again, I know the Rangers scored a couple of goals late, but the game was over. Did anyone really think they were coming back at that point? This is also one of those days where it just felt like Igor Shesterkin simply was not going to make the big save. And I know he's been hung out to dry all season. He's faced more high-danger scoring opportunities than any goalie in hockey. And the last time I checked, it wasn't particularly close. It's Igor on a landslide. So he has been hung out to dry. But did anybody think Igor had a great game? That first goal was pretty soft. Just wasn't good. And again, yes, he has struggled, but this is somebody that's supposed to be the best goalie in hockey. And does anybody think that Igor has been the best goalie in hockey this season? Does anybody think that Igor has a shot at the Vezina this year? Probably not. We got to be fair here. But the other thing that happened on this play, and I mentioned it just a second ago, you had Fox and Susie behind the goal line, just out of position, leaving the front of the net wide open, and it's an easy goal for the Canes. I got to give a shout out to Big Z35 on Twitter for bringing this to my attention. It's one of those things that, again, I think a lot of us are aware of it, but maybe you notice it kind of subconsciously. Big Z pointed this out to me, though. He was responding to one of my tweets. He says, "Too often, John, but tell me if I'm wrong. How often have we seen this season that both defensemen have been caught behind the net and a forward is left defending Igor in front of the net?" It seems to have happened a lot. It happened a couple of times in this game. It happened on this goal. It also happened when Vakanainen and Schneider were both behind the goal line earlier in the game. Vakanainen eventually got back out in front, but by then it was too late. You can't leave the front of the net wide open, and the Rangers do it constantly. And it seems like there are a lot of times, to Big Z's point here, that both the Ranger defensemen are behind the goal line, and nobody picks up the front of the net. It's like everybody's confused. Nobody knows what they're supposed to do. And it results in grade A scoring chances for the opposition. One of many reasons why, again, Igor has faced more high-danger scoring chances than any other goalie in hockey because the Rangers let it happen. They let it happen time and time again. And this in particular, the issue with the Ranger defenseman constantly being out of position, that certainly does not help. And while we're, critiquing the Ranger defensemen here, who have largely been awful all season, if we're being completely honest, we might as well look to Borgen and Miller also in the second period. These are the only two that we haven't talked about yet, but they were out there and both just looked lost on this goal that was scored by the Canes. You've got a long offensive zone possession for the Carolina Hurricanes. They're winning every race to a loose puck. They're winning every board battle. They're winning every 50-50 puck. They keep the play alive. They just keep going. They keep, I would love to see the Rangers have a shift like this in the offensive zone, but I'm not holding my breath at this point. But the Canes just keep going, strong on the puck, refusing to give it up. And keep in mind, this is a team that is locked into its playoff matchup. They know they are going to finish in second place in the Metro, and they know that they will have home ice against the Devils in the first round. Everything is locked up for the Canes, yet here they are, completely outworking a team that, in theory, should be desperate. And this possession just goes on forever. It just never stops. And then at the very end of it, you've got Keandre Miller chasing Sebastian Aho to the top of the zone and into the neutral zone. Aho got rid of the puck, and then Aho skated into the neutral zone. I imagine to just kind of reset, maybe make a drive toward the net. Miller follows him. Miller follows him into the neutral zone. Like, why are you up there? There's nothing happening up there. They're not going to pass it there. It would take them offside. So I didn't get that. And Borgen was even worse on this play. Like, Borgen, to be fair to both Miller and Borgen, this is the only thing I'll say in their defense here. They were on the ice forever. So maybe that was part of this. Maybe they were gassed by this point. But didn't make them look any better. They still didn't look good on this play. Borgen on the, I'm going to have a hard time even describing what I saw here. But the puck is in the corner. The Canes have it. Borgen goes over there and just doesn't really do anything. He just kind of half-heartedly with one hand on his stick, puts out his stick at the puck, misses it, and then circles around back in the opposite direction that the Cane was moving. And then Borgen comes to the front of the Ranger net and just kind of bumps into one of his own guys very softly, and then just stood there. He just stood there. And at this point, the Canes are getting their second or third chance at it. And Mika's there too, and he doesn't do anything to prevent the scoring chance. So I don't know. It was a disastrous sequence here for the Rangers. And there you go. In one segment here, I went after all 6 Ranger defensemen. So you can't sit here and tell me that I've been unfair to this guy or that guy. All 6 Ranger defensemen were bad in this game. The proof was in the pudding. Just another game where they're bleeding scoring chances. Just not playing good hockey. And that's been a theme for the Ranger defensemen all year. And to be fair, to be even more fair, Igor didn't have it in this game either. He had one ridiculous save in the third period. Igor did. Other than that, a lot of pucks getting by him that I think he's got to keep at least some of them out. Wasn't able to do it. In just a minute, we're going to shift our attention to Chris Kreider and why it's certainly looking like this might be the very end for him. He was, I don't know if he was necessarily benched in this game, but his ice time was very much scaled back. We're going to talk about that and everything that's on the horizon with Chris Kreider and his future or lack thereof with this New York Ranger team. We will get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It is the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. The satisfying crunch of opening each shell, it is like snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. Get snackin' and get crackin'. With a snack that packs a protein punch, visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode by talking a little bit about Chris Kreider and this decision that Peter Laviolette made in this game to really scale back his ice time. I mean, I don't know if that was the plan going in or he didn't like what he was seeing for Kreider and that was the result of it. I can't say for sure, but they showed this on the screen when they were going into the third period there. Through the first 2 periods, Kreider had only 12 shifts and 6 minutes and 28 seconds of ice time. He ended up with a little bit more time than that in the third period, but not much. He ends up with just 10 minutes and 31 seconds of ice time in the third period. The only 2 Rangers that had less ice time than Kreider in this game were Matt Rempe. He had 10 minutes. And Juuso Parssinen, I believe, had 9:47, somewhere in that ballpark there. Peter Laviolette's favorite player, Juuso Parssinen, the guy that's worth putting in the lineup over Gabe Perreault and Brandon Hoffman. It's really hard to get through an entire episode without, taking a swipe at Peter Laviolette for that. But be that as it may, let's stay focused here on Chris Kreider. As far as him losing ice time or being benched or whatever you want to call it, I can't sit here and say that it's unwarranted. I mean, somebody like Johnny Brodzinski ends up with more ice time than Chris Kreider. Johnny Brodzinski's been a far better player for the Rangers this season than Chris Kreider. That's just one example. But, we've seen what Kreider has brought this season And it's not just him. There's a lot of guys on this team that have really underachieved, but it cost Chris Kreider in this game. It cost him a lot of ice time. And I don't want to go on and on. I don't want to turn this into a Kreider bashing session, but the only thing I'll say is facts are facts. Look at the eye test, look at the numbers, look at whatever you want to look at. It just hasn't been good enough. A lot of people are going to bring up the back injury. Okay, fine. If the back injury is such a problem, then why was he playing in the Four Nations? I think that's a fair question at this point. But I mean, really, again, I don't want to go in on Kreider because to me, this whole situation, it's more sad than anything else. It's just rough that this is the way it's probably going to end for Chris Kreider as a New York Ranger. We're probably looking at the final 2 games of Chris Kreider. It's going to be the end of an era. And I understand there's fans out there, people listening to this, people watching this, people who aren't necessarily listening to this or watching this, that will defend him to the ends of the earth. And I get it. There's people that, again, are watching Ranger hockey this season that have never known Ranger hockey without Chris Kreider. He's been here forever. Parts of what is it now? Like 15 seasons, 13 seasons, 14, whatever it is. By far the longest tenured Ranger. And somebody that's been a part of some pretty amazing playoff runs. Somebody that's been on some teams that we really thought could win the Stanley Cup. I mean, he was in the finals all those years ago in 2014. Bunch of different years where they lost in the conference final where, they were right on the verge of getting back to the final. A couple in recent history as well. Tampa Bay a few years ago, Florida last year. It's been right there. And I think there's people that want more than anything to see this guy win a Stanley Cup for this team. But, I mean, does anybody see that happening at this point? It's very difficult to imagine. And it really is crazy that, again, I've brought this up before when we've talked about Kreider, but less than a year ago, we saw Chris Kreider go into this building with everything on the line. I mean, the Rangers were up 3-2, but you know what I mean. Pretty much everything was on the line. That series was in danger of really getting away from the Rangers. And he throws the team on his back in the third period and gets a natural hat trick, ties the game, gives the Rangers the lead. And then somebody, it might have been Barclay Goodrow, got the empty netter to send the Rangers on their way to the conference final. That was less than a year ago. And now the same building, we're seeing Kreider essentially get benched. Or again, if you don't want to call it necessarily a benching, at least have his ice time, greatly reduced. It's just sad. I don't want it to end this way. Because there's people, and it'll probably happen in this episode too, there's people that are going to come at me and say, oh my God, I can't believe you would talk this way about Chris Kreider. Look, if you're happy with what Chris Kreider has done for the Rangers this season, if you're happy with the season that he's had, the production that he's given this team if you feel that he's thrown the team on his back, that he's given forth the kind of effort that you're really proud of, that you think is acceptable, okay, more power to you. I'm not going to try to change anybody's minds. I'm just going by what I'm seeing on a night in and night out basis. This isn't fun for me. I had a heck of a lot more fun last season watching Kreider turn in a borderline iconic performance in Game 6 in the playoffs. That was awesome. I had fun watching this Ranger team win. I had fun when these players actually gave a damn. I had fun when the Ranger players actually had some fight in them, actually had some fire in their eyes. At any point this season, the Rangers could have stepped on the gas down the stretch here and at least grinded their way into the playoffs. That didn't happen. And just as sure as I praised, again, we talked about this earlier, just as sure as I praised the Ranger leaders for guiding this team last year and leading them into the playoffs and on that deep run, they're going to come under fire for the complete opposite happening this year, for everything falling apart and this team doing a complete 180 for really no good reason, other than Drury made a couple of moves that they didn't like. But I will say this. This is another plea that I'm going to go with for Peter Laviolette. Please do not make Chris Kreider a healthy scratch in either of these last 2 games. Now, if his back is killing him, and we've gotten to the point now where obviously they can't make the playoffs, so these games are basically meaningless. If that's the case, okay. But say that that's the case. Say we're taking him out of the lineup because he's hurt and there's nothing left to play for. Make it clear that that's the reason. It's injury related. And if that's the case, then by all means. I don't want to see Kreider as a healthy scratch in these last 2 games, though. I do want to see some of the Ranger young players get into the lineup. I talked about that earlier. Perreault, Berard, Othman. Robertson's going to make his debut. That's great. That's all well and good. I don't want it to come at Chris Kreider's expense because, again, the cold hard reality is that we are probably watching right now the final 2 games of Chris Kreider as a member of the New York Ranger. Nothing is set in stone. You never know. Could Kreider's relationship with this franchise be salvaged? It's possible. I'm not going to say it can't possibly happen. I mean, I think at the end of this season, pretty sure we're going to get a new coach that's going to be replacing Peter Laviolette. Will we get a new GM as well? Will somebody replace Chris Drury? It's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen. It feels to me, I've always just kind of got this sense that Drury's probably safe for at least one more season. And we'll debate that in a future episode at much greater lengths. But let's say in a hypothetical, they're both gone. They fire Drury, they fire Laviolette, they're both gone. And they bring in a new GM and they bring in a new coach and they sit down with Chris Kreider and they have a heart to heart and they hash everything out and they say, listen, like, I know things went bad, but like, are you on board? Like, are you going to be a New York bleeping Ranger next season? Are you going to bring it in a way that it didn't seem like you were this season? And Kreider can air out all his dirty laundry too and say everything that he's got to say to whoever the new GM, whoever the new coach might be. Any of this is at least possible. And maybe that back has slowed him down more than some of us realize. That's at least possible too. But that's a lot of what ifs and a lot of maybes. I just don't see how, after what has gone on this year, that the Rangers and Kreider are going to be able to repair this relationship. Again, never say never. Maybe a new coach can find a way to reach him in a way that Peter Laviolette has not. But I think at this point, given everything that's happened this year, not just for the Rangers, but for Kreider, Kreider's probably better off going somewhere else. I'd love to know what he's thinking. It's hard to say for sure. Maybe he wants a fresh start just as much as it seems like a lot of Ranger fans want to move on from Chris Kreider. And that might be good for him. I think the best place for Chris Kreider, if he was to get traded, would be probably a team that has a strong locker room, has a lot of leaders, has a lot of like established leaders on the team. I think about a team like maybe the Colorado Avalanche. You've got some big-time superstar players there. It's a winning team, a winning environment. They got some veterans. They got some guys that are very well established in their NHL careers. They won a Stanley Cup not too long ago. Kreider needs to go somewhere where, it's a strong locker room that's going to demand big-time effort night in and night out. I think that would bring out the best of Chris Kreider. And in describing a locker room like that, it doesn't feel like I just described the New York Rangers, if we're being honest. Just doesn't. If he goes to like a young rebuilding team, I don't think that's going to be good for him either, because he'll be like the established veteran in the room and there won't be anybody to kind of keep him honest. I think, again, the best place for him is a contending team. And if you're the Rangers, trade him to a Western Conference team, which is what they do with most of the guys that they move on from. But again, my advice to all Ranger fans, whether you love Kreider, whether you're sick of Kreider or anywhere in between, try to enjoy these last two games because he has been here for a long time. He's been part of a lot of winning, a whole bunch of different eras of New York Ranger hockey. He's had some big-time performances, some big-time seasons, but I would be very, very surprised if we see Kreider play more than two more games as a member of the New York Rangers. Stranger things have happened, but this does feel like we are quickly approaching the end of an era here. So we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that is @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.